I never thought I'd be standing here, watching someone else live the life I used to sneer at. Funny, isn't it? How fast the tables turn. I remember mocking no, her, dreams back then, and now, she's here, in front of me, effortlessly commanding attention I didn't think she could. And I can't look away. The repair shop smelled like burnt oil and motor grease, fluorescent lights humming overhead, illuminating dust motes like tiny sparks. I leaned against the counter, sipping lukewarm coffee, pretending I wasn't trying to memorize the lines of her face, the way her hands moved over the parts she was fixing. Clara. I had to remind myself of her name, even though I'd known it for years. She didn't look a day over. Well, she looked exactly like someone who knew her worth without asking for it. Careful with that, she said, voice calm but edged with that subtle authority that made me want to both obey and rebel at the same time. She didn't glance at me, but I caught the corner of her eye flicker in my direction. That small glance, barely noticeable, was enough to make my stomach twist. I tried to focus on the wrench in my hand. It felt heavier than it should. I cleared my throat, words sticking somewhere between my chest and my tongue. Need a hand? I asked, though I knew she didn't. Clara rarely did. She had this way of moving, precise and deliberate, as if the world existed only to be arranged perfectly by her hands. Yet she paused, just for a moment, and let me adjust the angle of the bolt. It wasn't much, just a flicker of permission, but that tiny concession made my pulse thrum in a way that didn't feel entirely rational. We fell into silence after that. I watched her trace a line of grease along her forearm, dragging a thumb over it like it wasn't hers. I wanted to reach out, wipe it off for her, but the words didn't come, and my fingers twitched against the wrench. The awkwardness wasn't uncomfortable, not really. It was electric. You always drink your coffee that bitter? She asked finally, not looking up, voice casual, but the corner of her mouth quirked, just slightly, teasingly. It was that small, knowing smirk that reminded me how long I'd underestimated her, how quick I had been to dismiss the dreams she carried as if they were whimsical, fragile things meant to fail. Yeah, guess I like the taste of regret in the morning, I muttered, the joke landing flat even to me. She laughed softly, the sound bouncing off metal shelves and oil-stained floors. The warmth in it made my chest ache, the ache of something I hadn't realized I wanted until now. There was a pause. We both lingered in it, neither of us speaking, and I caught myself staring a little too long, noticing the lines around her eyes, the strength in her posture, the quiet certainty that made her magnetic. She glanced at me again, shorter this time, like she was letting me in on a secret without saying a word. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a shared moment, fleeting and meaningless. But my mind kept replaying it. The brush of her hand against mine as I passed her the wrench, the way her eyes lingered just long enough before she looked away. Something had shifted, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I found myself back at the shop the next afternoon, pretending I had errands that conveniently led me to her workspace. Clara was crouched by a disassembled engine, sleeves rolled up, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. Even in grease-streaked coveralls, she carried an effortless kind of authority, the sort that made people stop and watch without realizing it. I thought you said you weren't coming back today, she said, voice even, almost detached. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp, measuring. I caught the hesitation behind her tone, like she wanted to tell me something but wasn't sure it was safe or allowed. I needed practice, I said, leaning against the counter, trying not to let my fingers brush against the edge where her hands had just been. She barely glanced at me, but I noticed the way her shoulders tensed for a fraction of a second. We worked in silence for a while. I passed her tools when she asked, watched the tiny movements she made, how her hands flexed over the bolts, the faint tremor when she wiped a bead of sweat from her temple. She was precise, but there was a vulnerability there, the kind that only comes from years of carrying more responsibility than anyone acknowledges. I realized she hadn't asked for help. She was letting me offer it anyway here, she said finally, standing a little straighter, her voice quieter than usual. She handed me a rag, and our fingers brushed. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it felt loaded, like static in the air before a storm. I kept my eyes on her, noticing the faint shadow under her eyes, the small crease at the corner of her mouth when she let a quiet laugh escape after I made some awkward comment about a stubborn bolt. She laughed softly, like it was a secret only she understood. She shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something. Hesitation, maybe fatigue, maybe something deeper. Her eyes dropped to the floor for a moment, then back up at me, guarded, but not entirely closed off. The contrast pulled at me in a way I couldn't name. I wanted to say something clever, something to make her drop the walls she'd built around herself, but I stayed silent, letting the moment breathe. I noticed how she paused when handing me the next tool, how her hand lingered just slightly longer than necessary. It wasn't a grand gesture, not a touch or a glance that shouted desire. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible reach toward connection. And yet, it made my chest ache, like she'd reached inside and nudged something I didn't even know I had. We worked side by side, and for a moment, the clatter of tools and the hum of the overhead lights faded. I was just watching her, breathing her in, counting the small movements she didn't realize anyone would notice. The way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the barely audible sigh when a bolt refused to budge, the careful, deliberate way she met my eyes only when she had to. At the end of the afternoon, we both froze for a second, caught in the unspoken charge between us. I stepped back, just a little, giving her space, and she looked at me, her expression flickering, something soft, maybe relief, maybe hesitation. I wanted to reach for her, to ask if she needed more help tomorrow, or if she wanted anything at all from me. But instead, I just held her gaze a fraction longer, letting the silence speak for us both. And when she finally nodded, almost imperceptibly, a shiver ran down my spine. The storm had started hours ago, tapping relentlessly against the warehouse windows, a soft but insistent reminder that we were trapped inside. Clara and I had stayed late, ostensibly to finish a stubborn repair. The lights were dim, fluorescent bulbs flickering occasionally, throwing long shadows across the floor. Every clink of a tool, every shift of her weight felt amplified. She was bent over the engine, adjusting a delicate component, and I found myself leaning just a little too close, pretending to inspect a part. My elbow brushed hers, barely, maybe a fraction of an inch, but it made me pause, breath catching in my chest. She didn't flinch, just continued her work with that quiet precision, but I caught the tiniest hitch in her breath, like she'd noticed. I never realized how stubborn this model could be, I said, trying to fill the silence, my voice cracking more than I intended. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, eyes meeting mine briefly. Yeah, it's tricky. You have to respect it. The words were casual, but there was something else in her tone, something I wanted to unravel, something I wanted to touch without really knowing how. A flash of lightning lit the room, and I swore I saw her hesitate, just a microsecond, as if waiting for me to say or do something. I wanted to lean closer, wanted to confess, wanted to tell her I hadn't stopped thinking about her since the last time we worked together. But the words lodged somewhere in my throat, trapped behind my own hesitation. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced down, an ex's name, I guessed from the small flinch in her shoulders. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she silenced it, tucking the phone back into her pocket. That tiny act, it wasn't just the interruption, it was a reminder that the world existed outside this charged bubble between us. Outside forces reminding me, subtly, that nothing could happen here. We returned to work, side by side, and I noticed the warmth of her shoulder just barely brushing mine. The contact wasn't intentional, or maybe it was, but it set my nerves on edge. I wanted to lean into it, to let the proximity say what words couldn't. Instead, I kept my hands on the tools, tried to focus on the engine, my heart hammering with restraint. You've gotten better at this, she said softly, eyes on the part she was tightening. There was something more in her tone, hesitation, curiosity, maybe an unspoken question, but I couldn't read it clearly. Thanks, I muttered, swallowing hard. I learned from the best. My voice was low, almost a whisper. I wanted to see her reaction, wanted her to tilt her head, to meet my gaze fully, but before anything else could happen, a thunderclap rattled the windows. Clara flinched slightly, gripping the counter for balance, and the moment was gone. We stayed close, lingering just a fraction too long, the storm drumming around us, our breaths uneven, hearts pretending nothing had shifted. I wanted to reach for her, just once, but I didn't. The near action hung in the air like static electricity, unspoken and unsatisfied, leaving me aching and restless long after the night ended. The workshop smelled of metal and rain. The storm had followed me here again, drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof. Clara was standing by the window, arms crossed, staring at the sheets of rain racing down the glass. I stayed silent behind her, pretending to adjust a shelf, but I could feel the weight of the space between us, thick and unyielding. I don't know why I keep doing this," she said finally, voice low, almost swallowed by the storm. I froze, pretending to tighten a bolt, heart hammering, not knowing what this meant. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff without knowing if you'd fall or fly. I swallowed. Doing what? My voice sounded too small, too careful. I hated how careful I had to be around her, how much I wanted to step closer and how much I couldn't. She turned slowly, eyes scanning mine like she was searching for a truth I wasn't ready to give. This. All of it. Us, whatever this is. Her hands flexed at her sides, trembling slightly, betraying the calm she tried to project. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her laugh and erase the tension, but nothing came. So I just stood there, watching the faint tremor in her jaw, the line of her shoulders tightening and relaxing like she was holding her breath. The silence between us became a language of its own, louder than any words I could muster. "I keep thinking I should step back," she said, voice breaking just slightly. "But then, I don't." Her eyes met mine, full of questions she couldn't, or wouldn't, say aloud. I noticed the small details I had missed before, the faint shadow under her eyes, the subtle weariness in the curve of her lips, the way her fingers twitched as if wanting to reach for something, or someone, but hesitating. I stepped closer, not touching, just closing the space between us a fraction. "Clara, my voice faltered. I wanted to tell her everything, wanted to confess the ache that had been simmering inside me since the first day I saw her. But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the words and let my eyes linger on hers, memorizing the flicker of vulnerability I wasn't supposed to see. She exhaled sharply, as if releasing all the weight she'd been carrying alone. "I don't know what's right anymore," she whispered. Her hands fell to her sides, trembling a little more, and I wanted to hold them, to steady her, to say it would be okay, but I stayed still. Watching was all I could do without breaking something delicate and fragile between us. The storm outside grew louder, but in the room, it was the silence that roared. A silence that spoke of longing, confusion, and the dangerous pull of something neither of us dared name. I think I'm scared of losing myself in this," she said, voice almost cracking, eyes glistening. She looked away, gaze fixed on the rain sliding down the window pane. The words hung in the air, devastating in their honesty, leaving me raw and trembling where I stood. And I realized, in that quiet, terrifying moment, that she had already found a way inside me. I was wiping down the counter when she slid a folded envelope across the metal surface, her hands lingering just a second too long. I looked up at her, surprised. She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she stared at the floor, toes tapping against the cold concrete. "Found this," she said softly, voice low, hesitant. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe it's time to let it go." Her fingers twitched as if she might snatch it back at any moment. I picked it up carefully, noting the familiar handwriting on the front. My chest tightened. I recognized it immediately. Her ex-husband, the one she barely mentioned, the one she'd left in the blur of her mid-30s when life had forced her to choose herself. "Clara," I started, unsure if I should speak. There was an almost sacred weight in the envelope, a relic of her past she hadn't let anyone touch before. She flinched slightly at my voice. "It's stupid," she said. "Just old memories. Things I thought I was done with. But Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choices. I swallowed, unsure how to respond without overstepping. She was standing there, hands curling nervously at her sides, and I noticed the faint scar on her wrist from years ago, a memory she hadn't shared with anyone, just a trace of pain tucked into her skin. My chest ached, knowing she carried all of that silently. "You're not stupid," I said finally, voice softer than I meant. You survived it, and you're still standing." My words sounded hollow even to me, but I couldn't stop myself. She turned her head slightly, a flash of vulnerability crossing her face that made my stomach twist. She exhaled a long, trembling sigh, and finally opened the envelope. A folded photograph slipped out, her laughing at a park, carefree, years younger, standing next to someone who wasn't me. I watched her face as she traced the edges with a finger, thumb brushing lightly across the photo, her eyes glossing over. I loved him," she said quietly, barely above a whisper. "And I don't know what I feel sometimes. I think about what we could have had, what I lost." Her voice cracked slightly, and she blinked rapidly, swallowing. I wanted to take her hand, to say something comforting, anything that would make the ache in her chest disappear, but I stayed frozen, letting her own words carry the weight. I said nothing for a long moment, just watched. Her vulnerability wasn't dramatic, wasn't theatrical. It was real, raw, and it shook something loose inside me. She wasn't expecting me to fix it. She didn't need me to. She just needed someone to see it, to see her. "I didn't tell anyone," she murmured finally, eyes still on the photo. "Maybe I was scared someone would think less of me. Maybe I just didn't want anyone in that part of me." I swallowed hard, feeling my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. She looked up at me then, the slightest tremor in her lips, and for a second, the world narrowed. I didn't move closer, didn't speak. Just let the silence stretch, letting the weight of what she'd shared hang between us. And in that stillness, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. I had never wanted to know someone this completely, and I had never feared losing someone this quietly. Her hand lingered on the photo, just slightly, as if holding on to a memory she wasn't ready to release. And I couldn't stop staring, knowing that, somehow, everything had shifted between us. The workshop was empty that evening, the hum of the city outside fading beneath the soft buzz of a single overhead light. We sat on opposite stools, knees almost touching, hands resting on our laps, neither of us speaking, letting the quiet stretch between us like something fragile and unspoken. Clara reached for the rag I'd set aside and wiped her hands, slow, deliberate, as if she were erasing more than grease. I noticed how the light caught the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the slight shadow under her lashes, and I realized I had memorized these details without even meaning to. "You don't have to say it," she murmured finally, eyes down, voice soft, cautious. "I know what's been here." I swallowed, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. She already knew. And I somehow already did too. The months of small glances, hesitant touches, awkward silences, and near confessions had led to this quiet, undeniable truth. She shifted on her stool, just slightly, bringing her knee closer to mine, and my hand twitched, hovering over the space between us. I let it rest there, inches away, because the hesitation itself was part of the intimacy. I didn't reach. Not yet. But the pull was electric, unspoken. "I was afraid," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper, "that if I let myself, I'd lose control, that it would all go too fast." She met my gaze then, steady, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't before. Surrender, but cautious, earned. "I wasn't going to push," I said, quiet, almost apologetic, "but I couldn't stop thinking about you. About this." I let my hand inch closer, brushing the back of hers without pressure, letting her pull away if she needed to. She didn't. Her fingers found mine, tentative at first, a brush that sent a thrill through both of us. No words were necessary. The gesture carried months of tension, confessions never said aloud, and the trust we'd built in stolen glances and shared silences. We stayed like that for a long moment, letting the rhythm of our breathing sink, letting the world outside the walls of the workshop fade away. I noticed the small tremor in her fingers, the faint intake of breath she tried to mask, and I knew she was letting me in. Not just into her space, but into the weight she carried, the past she'd survived, the quiet part of herself she rarely shared. I leaned forward just slightly, my forehead brushing hers, a whisper of contact, intimate but not demanding. She exhaled softly, a sound that carried relief, acceptance, and something I couldn't name but felt in every fiber of me. The rag slipped from her hand, forgotten, and we didn't reach for it. It didn't matter. The silence became comfortable, even sacred. For the first time in months, maybe years, there was no pretense, no hesitation, no near misses. Just us. And in that small, almost imperceptible moment, the touch of hands, the brush of foreheads, the shared space between two imperfect, flawed people, the world outside ceased to exist. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. And that was enough. I sometimes think about that night in the workshop, though it feels both yesterday and a lifetime ago. The storm outside, the hum of the lights, the quiet hum of the city beyond. It all seems like a distant memory now, a delicate frame around something that changed everything. I've learned that silence can be louder than words, and that patience can be its own kind of intimacy. Clara taught me that, not by telling me, but by letting me watch, letting me stumble, letting me learn the weight of her trust before I could understand what it really meant. She's different now, too, not in ways the world can see, but in the way she allows herself to be seen. There's a softness in her eyes, a quietness in her confidence, a willingness to lean just a fraction closer to someone else without fear. I notice it in little things, the way she laughs a little louder around me, how her hand lingers when we pass tools back and forth, the way she no longer flinches when someone catches her in a vulnerable moment. And me? I've learned that longing isn't weakness, and that wanting someone can be patient without being desperate. I've learned to listen more, to notice the smallest gestures, to hold space for someone else's pain and still allow myself to be seen. I've learned that love isn't always a grand declaration. Sometimes it's a shared silence, a brush of hands, a slow surrender that doesn't need to be named to exist. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at a memory, the way her fingers brush mine over a greasy rag, the way her exhale against my forehead made my chest ache with something I hadn't had words for at the time. Those small moments taught me more about connection than any romantic story I'd ever imagined. We still carry our scars, our regrets, our past heartbreaks. But now, we carry them differently, together in a rhythm that feels earned, not rushed. What we have isn't perfect. It's human, flawed, and real. And maybe that's what makes it worth holding on to. I've realized that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about being present, noticing the tiny things, respecting boundaries, and leaning into trust even when it feels impossible. And sometimes, it's about learning that the slowest moments are the ones that burn brightest. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the storm has passed, I remember her laugh, the curve of her smile, and the quiet way she let me in. I feel that warmth, that stillness, and I know we didn't just survive our moments together. We grew because of them. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?